was a crisp autumn afternoon when Jordan and his 8-year-old daughter Delilah decided to take their pug puppy, Ozzy, for a walk. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the quiet streets. Ozzy pranced happily at their heels, his tiny legs struggling to keep up with Delilah's swift pace. They passed the old graveyard near their neighborhood, a place that always made Jordan uneasy. The iron gates creaked as they pushed open, and the trees inside seemed to loom over the rows of gravestones. But Delilah loved it. She thought it was peaceful. "Let's just walk through, Dad," she urged, tugging on his hand. Jordan hesitated but gave in with a smile. "All right, but stay close. We don't want to get caught in the dark." They entered, the crunch of dead leaves beneath their feet the only sound. The cemetery was empty, except for a few weathered statues of angels and the occasional gust of wind that made the branches sway ominously. As they walked along the winding path, Delilah crouched down to let Ozzy sniff around the base of a tall stone monument. Jordan was about to call her over when something in the distance caught his eye movement in the shadows. Just beyond the row of tombstones, his heart skipped a beat. A tall figure, draped in a dark coat, appeared to be watching them. The figure stood motionless, half hidden behind an old mausoleum. Jordan's stomach twisted, but he chalked it up to nerves, reminding himself that it was probably just someone else taking a walk through the cemetery. "Delilah, honey, let's head back," he said, a little more sharply than he intended. She looked up at him, confused, but nodded. They turned around, but as they did, the figure moved, stepping out from the shadows. Slowly, purposefully, Jordan froze. The figure was too tall, too still. The way it moved and naturally slow sent a cold chill down his spine. And then, without warning, the figure broke into a run. Jordan grabbed Delilah's arm, yanking her behind him as Ozzy let out a sharp, frightened bark. He could hear the sound of heavy footsteps approaching, the crunch of gravel underfoot. His pulse quickened. "Delilah, run!" he yelled. They sprinted, their feet pounding the path as Ozzy scrambled to keep up. But the figure wasn't far behind. Jordan risked a glance over his shoulder and saw the dark shape closing in on them, its footsteps growing louder. A glint of metal caught his eye. It was a knife, glinting in the dim light, held tightly in the figure's hand. No, Jordan thought, panic rising in his chest. He pushed Delilah ahead of him, urging her to go faster, but Ozzy stumbled and fell behind. Jordan hesitated, looking at his daughter, then back at the puppy, who was now whimpering from the ground. The figure was getting closer. "Jordan, go!" Delilah cried, her voice filled with fear. Jordan turned to grab Ozzy, scooping him up in his arms just as the figure reached them. A cold, ragged laugh pierced the air, and Jordan felt his blood freeze. The figure was now only a few feet away, the knife gleaming in its hand. Without thinking, Jordan pushed Delilah behind him, positioning himself between her and the slasher. He held Ozzy tightly, feeling the little dog tremble in his arms. The figure stopped for a moment, tilting its head, studying him. The sound of heavy breathing echoed in the stillness. Jordan's chest heaved as he tried to steady himself, trying to find some way to protect his daughter. "Stay back!" Jordan shouted, his voice firm even though his knees felt weak. He knew he couldn't outrun this man. He had to fight. The slasher took another step forward, the knife raised. Jordan braced himself, holding the small pug protectively against his chest. His eyes never left the figure as he backed away, his hand reaching for the heavy metal flashlight in his pocket. When the figure lunged, Jordan swung with all his strength. The flashlight struck the slasher in the side of the head with a sickening thud. The slasher stumbled, momentarily disoriented. Jordan didn't waste time. He grabbed Delilah's hand and began running again, faster this time. They sprinted toward the exit, Ozzy still tucked against Jordan's chest. The figure recovered quickly, but the distance between them was growing. Jordan didn't look back. He focused on the gate just ahead. With one last burst of energy, they made it through the gates and onto the safety of the street. The slasher didn't follow. Jordan collapsed to his knees, breathless, with Delilah beside him. She clung to him, tears streaming down her face, Ozzy wriggling in his arms. He stroked her hair, trying to reassure her, but his own heart was racing, his mind reeling. "Are you all right?" Jordan whispered, his voice shaking. Delilah nodded, but she was trembling. "Daddy, that man, he had a knife." "I know," Jordan said, holding her tightly. We're safe now. You're safe. He looked back toward the cemetery, his eyes searching the shadows for any sign of the figure. There was nothing. The graveyard was empty once again. But Jordan knew one thing for sure. Whatever was out there in the dark, it wasn't over yet.